Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Chicago Business Podcast. I am your host, Drew Sekula, and today we are presenting a special edition, a conversation with Mark Curran, the Republican nominee to replace Dick Durbin, representing Illinois in the United States Senate in the November 3rd election. Mark has a unique perspective, having served a career in law enforcement, including 12 years as the sheriff of Lake County. In addition to talking about criminal justice reform and the code of silence among police officers, we discussed appropriate use of military force, the environment, immigration, and ideas on how to pay for all the spending, including eliminating the carried interest tax loophole and a necessary increase to estate taxes. Although I happen to be related to Mark, I do not agree with all of his positions. However, I do believe that all are entitled to be heard and develop their own opinions and should do so. I also believe that nobody has all the right answers and we need to come together to reconcile each other's perspectives in order to move forward and create a long-term solution to the inequities inherent in our society. Everyone needs to reflect internally and consider how they can help be part of the solution. But that's just my 2 cents. Please listen to what Mark has to say, develop your own opinions, and take action. And of course, I would appreciate the opportunity to host an episode with Dick Durbin, the Democratic candidate, and we'll reach out to his office to see if he will do it. With that, enjoy the show. Mark, nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Chicago Business Podcast.
Thank you, Drew. My pleasure.
Very excited to have you here. The U.S. Senate candidate on the Republican ticket going up against Mr. Dick Durbin here in November. So welcome to Chicago Business Podcast. Great to have you.
Thank you, Drew.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Yeah.
So what is our exact relationship? So I'm first cousins with your mom.
That's right.
Makes us first cousin removed? Or?
Once removed, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. So it's I was excited to see see that you were running. I saw that you won quite the run. I guess it's not technically a runoff, but felt like it, right? Five candidates there for the primaries.
So the Republican primary had 5 candidates, and I got 42%, and the next closest was 19 points behind me. So it was a nice win.
Yeah, that's quite formidable. I saw you had lots of endorsements there as well, and that was quite the
all the newspaper endorsements. You know, I got a lot of big endorsements throughout the state. So yeah, that was great.
Right, but you got your work cut out for you now coming up for November,
right?
Huh?
No question about it.
So that's great. Well, I'm excited to have you on. I got a bunch of stuff I'd like to run through and cover with you, because I think that although you are related, I do plan on I think that gives me some a little bit of leeway to get you with
absolutely.
I've already been working on you a little bit before we're on camera here, but I'll try not to be too rough with you here. So anyway, no, that's great. Maybe if you could start by just talking a little bit about, your record, your qualifications. Of course, you were the sheriff of Lake County there for 12 years, 3 successive terms. And if you can talk a little bit about your record and what makes you, the right candidate, or how you got here, that'd be great.
Okay, so I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and moved to Chicago when I was approximately 2. My mom passed away, and I actually moved to Chicago when I was 6 months. I'm sorry. And then a couple years later, my stepmom, my dad got remarried, and I have 2 half brothers and a half sister, and so Drew's grandparents, specifically his grandmother, was my dad's sister, and then what have you, and so that's the connection. I went to Loyola Academy in Wilmette. We lived on the south side for a little bit. Then I lived up in mostly in Lake County. Went to Loyola Academy in Wilmette. Went to Spring Hill College, a Jesuit college down in Mobile, Alabama. How did I get there? Well, my dad said he'd pay for any Catholic college, so I was trying to find one in a nice place and happened upon Spring Hill. So then I went to IIT Chicago-Kent for law school. I worked briefly in private sector in capacity at Continental Bank, which is now defunct. It's where Bank of America is at the corner of LaSalle and Jackson. And really started my career off in the Lake County State's Attorney's Office 30 years ago. I was a prosecutor there for 8 years, went through the ranks, tried a lot of murder cases as a prosecutor. Then I went on to the Illinois Attorney General's office. I was hired to start up a criminal division by Jim Ryan. And I worked there from 98 to 02. And I tried cases throughout the state of Illinois. I tried murder cases down in Jonesboro and, way the heck out in Adams County and all over the place. In 02, I went out into the private practice of law. I was a conflict public defender. So now I wound up getting appointed on a lot of murder cases. I had a lot of really high-profile cases that I was representing people on. I had a private practice of law, criminal practice, and I represented Ford Motor Company locally. And so I had a mixed bag of things that I did. In 06, I was contemplating running for state representative, and I was approached to run for sheriff. And I did that instead. Ran for sheriff, won the primary, then won the general election. I switched parties in 08 from Democrat to a Republican, and then I was reelected in 2010, 2014, and 2018. I had the highest Republican vote totals in all those elections. 2018, I'm sorry, I did not win. I lost by 137 votes out of 250,000, and but I had 30,000 more votes than any other Republican. In 2018, I had been up by 1,000 votes on election night, and we went down to Florida for Thanksgiving. 2 weeks later, on I think it was November 20th, they counted the late arriving ballots by mail, and my opponent got 75% of those, and I lost by 137 votes.
So I haven't done the math, but that's got to be like 0.01% or something crazy.
Well, we looked at the possibilities, and when we saw where the ballots were coming from, we said there's no possibility. Everybody said there was no possibility in my losing, and wound up losing. And so I went back into practice of law. I had some opportunities to do different things. I could have, gone for a judgeship. I could have run for state house in a much easier race that I would have won. And instead, I chose to run for U.S. Senate. And like I said, 5-way primary, and I beat them all. And now I'm the nominee for United States Senate from Illinois.
That's great. That's great. So, got to ask. We ran through that pretty quick, but let's talk briefly about the whole switching parties. So, that was back in 2008. Can you give us just a little more color about that and what drove that decision?
Yeah. So I was a Democrat candidate, but I had been voting Republican for president. The Supreme Court was important to me, and I'm very pro-life, and I wanted to make sure that there was a good chance that pro-life justices would be appointed. And as I ran as a Democrat in that cycle in 2006, I just saw the direction of the party. I saw it going further and further left. And I spoke with people, and the general consensus was stay where you're at. Party switchers get killed. They're going to come after you. And I just said, well, as a matter of conscience, I just can't. I don't like the direction of the Democratic Party, and I'm just going to switch. And I did, and that was that.
Right. I get it. So one of the things looking at your background that kind of jumped out at me and was, and you were the first sheriff ever to spend a week in your own jail. So right. Was it a full undercover boss experience before that, or
you can watch some videos if you want? I can pull up there's a lot of the old videos got gone. They don't stay up forever, but there's still old YouTubes from Fox News and from Channel 9 and from others when I spent that week, 8 days in jail. And, I wore the prison garb. I slept there, every night. I ate the food. I did whatever a prisoner is supposed to eat. and do. But I'm 6'5". I'm a big guy. I'm recognizable, so it didn't take long for most of the inmates to figure out who he was and what have you.
Yeah. What'd you learn through that experience?
So what prompted it was, in the book of Matthew, Christ says, I was in prison and you visited me. And I had spent a lot of time with Chuck Colson. And Chuck Colson, for those of you that don't know, he was a former White House counsel for Richard Nixon. He wrote a book called Born Again, which is one of the best-selling books of all time. So many people attribute their conversion story to it. He started Prison Fellowship International. And I attributed it to the Holy Spirit. I was just inspired, and I decided I was just going to spend a week in my own jail. And it wasn't so much to learn, I knew what we did in our jail, what have you. It was more to be able to draw attention to the fact that we need to give people second chances, and that we're not doing things right as far as incarcerating people in America, and how often we're doing it, and the fact that there's so little valuable programming and so little valuable input given to them. So when I got out on the last day, one of the reporters said to me, started asking me about the question that you just asked me, what'd you learn? And, it was basically I didn't learn anything, and I started talking about, the need for second chances. And he said, well, if you were going to, if that's all you were going to do, why wouldn't you just call a press conference and talk about that? And I, without even thinking, I said, because you wouldn't come. So the story was that I spent a week in my own jail, and it was packed with media from all over. And while I was in jail, CNN, the CNN equivalent overseas, everything was it was crazy how big the story went.
So, okay, so in terms of on the political spectrum, then where do you? We're going to get into a lot of details and talk about specifics, but from a high level, how do you describe yourself?
So, I would describe myself as somebody who's a faithful Catholic, and that drives my political perspective. And so I don't like these, are you conservative, are you liberal, are you this, are you that? What I tell people is that when Moses, came out of when our Lord came out of the bush to Moses, he didn't hand him a party platform, it wasn't, there's nothing magical about these. So I'm just trying to be, somebody that is, my perspective is based in natural law, but it's also based in what are we doing for the marginalized, those that are on the outskirts.
Right.
So that drives it. So, what am I? You tell me.
Well, let's let everybody make up their own mind as we kind of talk through the the platform in specifics. So, so I think we can go ahead and kind of get into that.
All right.
So before we get too much further, let's go ahead and introduce the beverage of the day. We again had a nice time out on the golf course earlier, just there at Oak Brook Golf Club, and so. Late this afternoon here, it's after 4 o'clock. It still qualifies for the for this Lagunitas daytime IPA. Only 3 carbs. This was your selection.
Thank you.
So
it was my selection. And it's only got like 98 calories, so 2 more than Miller Lite.
There you go. All right, I got you a glass if you'd like.
Thank you. I don't need a glass.
Okay,
I'm old school.
In some combination of the two. But I do like a glass.
Oh, I should use a coaster, though.
Okay. So.
Oh, what the heck?
Yeah.
Talk me into it.
Nice light beer on this hot day. Although it started raining, we got off the golf course just in time as well.
We did. Tastes pretty good, huh?
It does taste good. Let that settle, and then we'll have a nice little cheers.
Right.
Okay, so with that, though, let's go ahead and talk about, the one of the hot topics that everybody's really, it's top of mind, and that's really kind of the, criminal justice reform and related issues, as we've found, in the news here. There's a lot going on there. I'm sure you have a very interesting perspective with 12 years served as the sheriff and a life in law enforcement. So I'd like you to kind of give a state of the affairs on criminal justice reform. I know we actually did make some progress in that in terms of federal laws in not too distant future, but it seems like we have a long way to go. So if you could share your perspective.
Right. So President Obama commissioned that 20th century policing and 21st century policing, excuse me, and put some good people on it, and they came out with some proposals and recommendations. But, generally speaking, what I'd say about law enforcement now is the training is better than it's ever been. So much is invested in training right now, and, it's so much more than they had historically and what have you. And so the training is really good. The bigger departments, basically all of them require a college degree. Chicago Police Department requires 60 hours, so I suppose you can go to school for 60 hours and not get a degree, but why would you? And then Illinois State Police requires a college degree, so they're headed in that direction. So you see the professionalization of law enforcement happening. And, you hear this about psychologicals and what have you. I don't know a department that doesn't do a psychological. That you'll have to do a psychological and a lie detector, as part of a standard background. They'll do a background beyond that. So the screening is actually way beyond what it ever was. And you have some accountability now. In Illinois, for example, they have this, when President Obama was in the state Senate, they passed legislation that mandated for all traffic stops that they had to fill out those racial profile sheets. So you see how many, African Americans are being stopped and what have you. And so there's so many checks and balances. And so what I would say is, having managed all of those people and having been around cops my whole life, is there's bad cops. There's bad people. And it's kind of like, we're teaching a business ethics class. Well, that's okay, because I already made up my mind that I'm going to steal as soon as I get out into business. That's the way it is. You have people that you can train them to death, and you can teach them this, that, and the other ethics, but they're just rotten human beings. And they made it through, and what have you. The one thing that I'll tell you that I think virtually any department of any size has is a code of silence. There's no question about it. My department had it, and as sheriff, for having been sheriff for all those years, I can tell you this much, Drew. I had 2 people that would actually call me and check in on me once in a while. And I had all these other people, like they knew I was a person of faith, so they'd come in and they'd say, hey, can we pray the rosary with you or what have you? And I would. And if I were to call them today, they wouldn't return my call. So it's a really, really lonely job, because if you do it right, you really shouldn't have any friends, because you might have to fire or discipline that any one of them on any given day, and you want to be fair. You want to hold people accountable. So the reality is that asking someone that has a gun and a badge, typically an alpha male, telling them that they're done and that you want their gun and their badge by the end of the day, that's these guys don't go quietly in the night. You know what I'm saying? Like in your business, hey, things aren't working out and maybe you better go find something else. Well, the bigger departments have a college degree. I could never get it past my merit commission. So some of these guys, most of the guys all of the guys before me didn't have a college degree. And they're making $125,000. And there is no way they can make anywhere near that money in private sector. So for till their last breath on earth, they're trying to destroy you. So even as I run for U.S. Senate and I'm gone from the office, I still have these jokers from the past that come out and troll me. So And then, what Tom Dart said when he's the sheriff of Cook County, when that essentially everybody he'd fired, he lost the arbitration on. It was like impossible to get rid of anybody. So, you have liberal arbitrators, and then they lose before the arbitrator, then they have a chance to go into circuit court, and they may have a judge that's sympathetic to them because he, knows whatever. And so it's not like private industry where you just fire people. It's very, very, very difficult to fire people. And then, you're coupling with the situation, especially, you're a chief in a big city. They don't last very long. They last, I think, I'm not sure if they have 3 years or something like that on average. And a sheriff, he's got to run for election every 4 years. So there's no long time tenure typically. So, okay, this head guy is going to be gone. And then they're going to put new people in, and then they're going to come after me. So I'm going to, be Schultz from Hogan's Heroes. I see nothing. And, that's the reality is that, Edmund Burke said that for evil to triumph, all that needs to happen is good men to say nothing. Well, that is clearly what happens in law enforcement.
Okay. That doesn't give me a lot of hope or positive vibes on how we're going to get this,
So what I would say about that,
forward.
So what I would say about that is, I don't see racism certainly not towards blacks. I just don't believe it. Like I said, you have the racial profiling sheets. Everybody has a camera nowadays.
So a question on that. In terms of the racial profiling sheets, does that document just the stops or what happens after the stops?
So it documents the stops, but they have body cameras now. We all had body cameras that they're mandated to turn on. There's in-car squad cameras that automatically kick in. All these people on the street, they're allowed to film and video everything, so they have their own cameras. And so all you have to look at is the numbers. There's so small number, police shooting of African Americans. It just doesn't happen. I'm going to concede to you that there's probably racism that still exists, but it's usually towards Latinos. They assume they don't have papers. They assume they're not, they're not documented, and for whatever reason, you see the same thing, sometimes with the far right rallies that, when they start screaming about immigration and what have you, that you can see it in their tone that they're really angry, and that happens in law enforcement, but not blacks. I just don't believe it. I'm trying to be as objective and honest as possible. I just don't see it.
And so, what are the facts behind that then? When you say you don't see it, you're saying you're looking at data, or you've had access to the data. This is a pretty...
So I know... you're living in a country that elected Barack Obama twice. Okay? African American. And the Republicans, they love it when, the Candace Owens or, some black shows up and they're throwing bombs and, and what have you. So they think those people are the greatest thing that ever happened. So I don't think that... it's just not, I'd love to say that I wouldn't love to say what it happens. I have no agenda other than to speak truth. I don't see it. Tell me what, they've said that before when, if there was racial incidents, bring them to us. It's just not happening. So you probably know a lot of bad people. I know a lot of bad people. I know a lot of bad cops. Is racism what drives them towards blacks? No, they're just nasty, they're looking out for themselves. They have angry personality, antisocial, off the charts. And they don't have any spiritual... The danger, I always, why I draw it back to faith is that, you give a guy a gun and a badge and he has no spiritual life, nothing to center him, he could become pretty dangerous, a guy or a lady.
So what do you attribute the disproportionate... makeup of the prison population so that's one question. Another one is from a prosecution perspective. You spent a long time in the state's attorney's office as well. Do you think that there's racism there, or do you think that is a fair system?
So I think it's black males make up 6% of the U.S. population. They account for 44% of all homicides. So there's a disproportionate number of, crimes being committed, obviously right there. Johnny Cochran, who was O.J. Simpson's lawyer, said the color of justice is not black or white, it's green. So you got a public defender because you don't have a lot of money. And the next guy's got Johnny Cochran. And a lot of it is, I know the prosecutor, I know the judge, I'll get the deal, the better deal. And, because I can take him to a basketball game and for a steak dinner and what have you. Public defender's never going to do that. So here's your crappy deal, public defender. And here's your good deal, Johnny Cochran, whoever's representing them. So that does happen. Is the criminal justice system have flaws for which it's unfair? Sure. Could a judge whack a black guy harder than, a judge has a lot less accountability than a cop. Than a white guy? Sure. Are some of these judges just probably racist and it's easier for them to get away with it? Yes. So what I'm saying is it's harder for police to get away with racism also. So the flaws in the criminal justice system would be in the judiciary, to a large extent. And also prosecutors. I mean, you get these prosecutors, they've been there for, 30 years or 25 years. They have a worldview, a mindset that, everybody's bad and I'm gonna send them away and what have you. I think it's a disservice that they didn't have to spend any time representing people and that they get to stay in those offices that long and wind up being such a hard ass.
Yeah. So let's talk about bad cops a little bit more then. So this cop in Minnesota, he had gotten in quite a bit of. There have been several reports, a dozen reports of misconduct that had been filed. Why was he not previously held to account for his actions?
Once again, you get into the whole union and what, protection and what have you, and, it's a battle. I guess the other thing that in his situation was that, Amy Klobuchar was the district attorney up there, right?
Right.
And she didn't prosecute him on any of this. So there was a district attorney in Lake County, Illinois, that was there for 22 years maybe. He served as the district attorney, the state's attorney for Lake County, Illinois. I can't think of one case where he ever indicted a cop for police misconduct. Ever. So that's the other danger. You know what I mean? Your worldview is so limited that you're working with the police and they do no wrong and and what have you. So there are a lot of people that think that way. And having had my job and having been honest about it, I can tell you there's a lot of really bad people that are cops.
So how do we hold them to account?
Well, like I said, somebody posted this the other day, and I thought, that's exactly right. The public sector union is probably in some ways the greatest enemy of Black Lives Matter, because they have all this accountability. I mean, they have all this protection that makes it so hard to hold them accountable. And it is what it is. I think that people sell out for a lot of different things. You look at Black Lives Matter is aligned with Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood is put in the inner cities to increase abortions of minorities. And the founder of Planned Parenthood, her design, her vision that she articulated was that we could eradicate minority babies from the earth. And they're living it through. 3 out of 5 pregnancies in the African American communities, they end in abortion. So they're committing genocide on their own people. Their political numbers are going down, down, down because they're a smaller and smaller percentage of the population. I said that the moment with Barack Obama, that might have been their highest moment, politically for a long time. Just, if they looked at that as, a black guy became president, just because they're not, without, if they're alone and they don't align with other groups, there's just not There's just not that many of them anymore. There's less.
Mm-hmm. Well, man, that doesn't give me a whole lot of. I'm not quite sure where to go with that. There's, I guess, several things come to mind. I guess first I want to take a step back a little bit on. You mentioned Amy Klobuchar's comments on this, and she's been, definitely questioned and as to why she didn't do more up there in Minnesota when she had. I think she was responsible for some of what the department, I guess, or the prosecutions, I should say, during the period of time that many of the complaints for this particular officer had come through. She had said that one thing she would do differently would be to present the case directly to the judge instead of taking it to the grand jury. I'm interested in hearing your perspective on. Do you think grand juries are the problem?
That has got to be like if that's what she said, that's got to be like one of the worst lies I've ever heard in my life. So there's an old saying that a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich. So the way a grand jury works is they're impaneled, and the proceedings, there's a portion that's on the record, and that's the portion where they're either questioning a witness or they're actually giving the probable cause for the offense of the crime. But there's all kinds of components of the grand jury being in the courtroom, being in the grand jury room, and the prosecutor just off the record telling them things, talking about the case, what have you. And so that for that reason, a prosecutor can get a true bill or an indictment on any case they want. So the grand jury is never an obstacle from that perspective. Grand juries are better for complicated cases because you can subpoena witnesses to a grand jury, and they either have to testify or they take the Fifth Amendment, and you can conduct that proceeding in secret. So you got one witness, you're locking in that witness, and you want to use that witness's testimony to get other suspects or other witnesses, and word's not going to get out, because it is a secretive proceeding. So, I mean, it's like silliness.
Yeah, no, I thought so as well.
So, what I'd also say is that George Floyd, I would have indicted that same day. I would have charged it the same day. That officer would have been in prison that day. There was no reason to wait around. And they said that's the fast. So there are a lot of prosecutors out there that just don't have the guts to do the right thing. That's the fastest we've ever charged a police officer. Well, that's still pretty pathetic.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know how much variation there is between states of the different, first degree, second degree, third degree murder. I don't know if those are consistent across states or not, but the second degree murder, like I've noticed in the papers here, or in the notifications I've gotten from the Tribune, there's been multiple cases of guys who happen to be black related to deaths that have happened with related to the looting things. There was the chase through the city just the other day where they caused a death, a traffic accident and a death. And there was also related to the Cicero looting incident. Someone was killed. In both cases, they were charged with first-degree murder. I know that that generally means that there's some kind of predisposition or some kind of plan, premeditation involved. Like, does it make sense that second-degree murder is, or that those guys get charged with first-degree murder when the George Floyd cop is a second-degree murder? Or I don't know if that's something.
So yeah, the statutes are all over the place. Every state is different. Clearly the federal statute. There is no federal murder statute, but the states, they vary the way they describe what's called first-degree murder is called second-degree murder somewhere else, what have you. For example, in Illinois, it's first-degree murder if you intended to kill, if you knowingly did an act for which there was a substantial probability of death, but and that's what followed. That's still first-degree murder. And if you commit a felony, a forcible a felony, certain enumerated felonies, and somebody dies in the course of that felony, that's first-degree murder. Second-degree murder is involuntary, so that would be like a heat of passion. When somebody walks in on their wife and in bed with another guy, and they don't have time to really, think it through, and they wind up killing them, what have you. That'd be a second-degree murder. Reckless homicide, that would be is another offense. So these things all get grouped, and they all get classified differently.
Okay, no, that's that helps. So back to how do we fix this? And we got lots of other stuff to talk about, but I think this is a big one. There's a lot of talk out there about defunding the police. What are your thoughts on defunding the police? And if it's not that, if it's the public sector unions, then how do we make that happen?
Yeah, those are good questions. So if you defund a police department, then the sheriff becomes the police for that area. So the sheriff in most states has a constitutional authority, has a constitutionally given role of which the legislature cannot get rid of absent a constitutional convention. It's a constitutional office. So the sheriff is required to patrol if there's not a police department there, as the sheriff does in all the unincorporated areas and contracted areas.
Including here?
Right. And I foresee that as something that's going to happen in the future, because you see municipalities saying, wow, we can't really afford this anymore. Let's just hire a couple sheriff cars for coverage instead, and we can get rid of this building, and we can get rid of all the other costs and everything else. So that's going to be a trend that's going to happen. I think, people have to answer, how much police do you want? I think a lot of people get pissed off. Why are they stopping me for a seatbelt? I mean, give me a break. I pay all this money in taxes. If I don't want to wear a seatbelt and I get killed, oh well, isn't that on me? You know what I'm saying? So a lot of people don't want the law enforcement to be all over the place and feeling like they're living in a police state, and they threw up all these red light cameras and everything else to try to get into your wallet and what have you. So there's a balance between that and, do we want the Wild West again, where there's one sheriff and he deputizes a couple people as need be, and, most disputes are settled in a saloon with, who's a quicker draw. I mean, do we want to go back to that? I don't, people have to answer that question. How much government do they want? I don't think that, defunding the police is the world that I want to live in. I want to be protected. And most police officers are good guys and ladies. You know what I mean? Like I said, there's a bad element. There is a code of silence, but most of them are good people trying to do their job. What do you do about that code of silence? Once again, if I had to do it over again, what I would have done as sheriff, and if I ever do it again, I'm going to bring more people in from the outside, because you don't want people that came up through the ranks with. Together, because their loyalty is never going to be to the guy at the top. It's going to be to the guy that they've known all these years, especially when they're thinking, oh, he might be gone, and then, then I won't have any protection. So why would I even align myself with him? So they don't do that.
Anything else in the public sector unions?
Public sector unions, I don't want to be anti-union. The problem is that, the public sector unions typically give all their money to far left Democrats. So let's say they elect the public sector union elects Tony Preckwinkle, and then Tony Preckwinkle, on behalf of the taxpayers, negotiates the contract with the public sector unions. So how's that working out for the taxpayer? And then you couple that with the fact that these contracts are written in such a way that it's very, very hard to discipline. And so there's a lot of problems, at least with trade unions and what have you. You don't have that same thing where they're negotiating the contract with the people that they give all the money to when they help get in office. So does that seem like a problem to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So It's I don't know. It's Chicago, right?
Yeah. That's a tough one.
Right.
It's a tough one.
Because I don't think they're going away.
Yeah. So I'd like to say on a lighter note, but I'm not sure that it is. In fact, I know it's not. So another top of mind issue and what we were all focused on before criminal justice reform. It's kind of what's going on with COVID-19 and where we where we find ourselves today. I know you've been pretty vocal in your feelings on
displeasure,
the shutdown and everything. So why don't you share some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I have 3 boys, 22, 21, and 16, just turned 16. He'll be a junior at Carmel Catholic in Mundelein this year. And he's a football player. And if he doesn't get to play football this year, I'm going to, take a battering ram right into Pritzker's office and, bang the door down and grab him by the neck. Because I really think that, how they've robbed these children of their childhood is shameful. I mean, at the end of the day, they cannot get sick from this. There are rare exceptions, but we've quarantined them forever. We're taking away their ability to, this is a time in their life that they'll never get back. I would feel horrible if I was like a grandparent in my 80s or something like that, and watch my grandkid doesn't have a summer, doesn't get to be with his friends, doesn't go to school, so doesn't learn the lessons on the correct way, doesn't get to play baseball all summer, doesn't get to do, there's no pool or parks or anything else, and they're doing all this because of me. You know what I mean? I'd be like, no, you let my grandkid have his life. That's not right. He's never gonna be 12 years old again. That's horrible. And then what it's done to businesses and everything else, and just the hypocrisy. They clearly didn't care about it during this George Floyd business, but when there were peaceful protesters with regards to the quarantine, they were calling press conferences every day to denounce them. I mean, they're just very hypocritical, and they don't accept the science either. I mean, the World Health Organization put out a release saying that masks didn't help, and then the World Health Organization recently put out a release saying that the spread does not, for asymptomatic carriers, they're not going to spread it. And you look at the bottom line numbers, the percentage of people that are actually going to die from this in the United States is going to be below 0.25%. So that's not much different than the flu. It's a little worse, but it's not much different. And so we shut down the economy. There's businesses going out of that are never going to return and what have you. And I just think that in the churches, the church leaders have been horrible. The Cardinal, the Archbishop of Chicago, he's got no voice and acts as though it's no big deal that churches have been closed for so long.
Yeah. Makes a big difference for a guy who regularly attends like yourself, huh?
Right, exactly. So it's been tough.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the political leadership then and what, where we stand there. I know one thing that we talked about a little bit earlier was term limits. It seems as though you have some opinions with regards to those. Where do you stand?
So I signed the term limit pledge, and I'm a big term limit proponent. I'm running against a guy who's been in Congress for 38 years. So he's 76 years old this year, and he went to Congress when he was 38. He had other jobs in government before that. He's really never had a job outside of government, and it's horrible. His wife was a lobbyist, his son's a lobbyist, getting filthy rich. And you think about it. Okay, so here's, his office sends out a release announcing the all his grants and legislation that his office helped put through in terms of legislation, and his wife was the lobbying interest on the same legislation. It's like, you got to be kidding me. So where is the taxpayer fit into the situation when a lobbyist is writing checks to the politician and then voting on the business that the lobbyist represents. And that's part of the reason why it's so hard for small businesses, because the playing field is so unfair. These big corporations have all this money to lobby and what have you, so they stifle competition. They write rules that prevent startups from being able to get in the game. And we talked about this before. I think the one thing that's not going to sustain is the disparity in wealth and income in America. So we're going to lose that battle, whether we're going to have socialism. At some point, you see it with the Bernie Bros and the Elizabeth Warren crowd, and Trump ran on this. The disparity in wealth. People got pitchforks. They're ready to go. And most Republicans believe in a wealth tax. So,
what are your opinions on a wealth tax?
Yeah, I think we have to look at different things. The reality is, you look at a business that we talked about, this one company up in Lake County that took all these jobs, shipped them overseas. They had all their manufacturing in China and around China, and they're making masks in Wuhan, right in the midst of this pandemic. And the CEO is filthy rich, and not that much of the money trickles down after the first layer of executive pay. And we've killed the middle class in this country. We know in small businesses the pay is much fairer. In these large corporations, the pay is not all that fair. It's that crony capitalism. These people at the top that rob it blind, pay the workers not all that well.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, we have had some conversations previously about ethylene oxide specifically, and as that all relates. I know that you've taken some positions there and issued a press release with regards to.
Yeah.
So do you want to
help me out on that? Yeah, just Medline Corporation wanted to. That's the company we were talking about before that wanted to clean their masks with that, and we know that there's a cancer component that ETO, and that until they can find us some studies that say there's not, let's not be risking people's health and safety by doing that.
Right. Yeah. No, I was very glad to see you come out and with a position and saying that ETO should not be allowed to be admitted in densely populated urban areas. So strongly agree with you there, and was great to see that coming out from you. So thank you for that. The we talked a little bit about taxes. And earlier we also touched on kind of carried interest in what in that particular piece. Do you have any? Have you decided any positions on carried?
Yeah,
interest?
I think that we need to, when you and I has spent some time discussing that. And I think that we need to do away with that as far as venture capital firms and equity firms equity management that. Are able to pay at that lower capital gains rate. That's not right. That I think that they should pay. That should be ordinary income, and we need to do away with that. That's part of what fuels the great disparity in income, wealth, and income.
Right. So there's a couple great ideas, I think, in terms of how we can get to close that gap. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of the rich getting richer and the poor, not only poor but middle class, really just being taken to the cleaners. So.
Yeah, exactly.
You have any other ideas on other things we can be doing at this point?
Yeah, I think we have to look at tax rates and ask, whether they're right or not. We should probably consider a wealth tax, whether or not that's an appropriate piece, and inheritance tax. At 22 million, they're at 40%. At 1 billion, they're at 40%. So, could there be a graduated increase, as you get more and more beyond that 22 million number. I think that we definitely have to worry about corporations doing what Medline did, and just shipping those jobs overseas. That there's got to be, heavy tariffs. We got to penalize them. We can't make them do that. I mean, if they don't want to pay the American worker a fair wage, then maybe they shouldn't be in that business. And I think that we need to have an economic policy and a trade policy that adheres to the principle that if it can be made in America, generally speaking, it should be made in America.
Seems like a logical place to be, especially after all we've been through.
Right? Yeah. I mean, if we get to the point where there's so many American jobs and everybody's making a nice wage and what have you, and that we can afford to, be making more shirts over in whatever, China, India, you pick it, then okay, but we're not there.
Right.
America first. I mean, that's what President Trump has run on, and people look at that as racism and xenophobic, but it's not. I mean, we've been getting killed on trade, and the reality is that charity should begin at home. We should take care of Americans first. I'm not somebody that's against any type of foreign aid or doesn't realize that, we could be a good steward with our resources as well around the globe, but charity should begin at home.
Right. What are your thoughts on immigration and reform?
Yeah, I've been somebody that has been a big proponent of immigration reform, that we can't deport all these people, nor should we deport all these people. The absolute reality is that essentially every business group in America agrees with that. The problem is we have an element within this party that's not full of successful business people. It's not full of people that are particularly well educated on the issues, and they seem to think that we can just somehow get rid of all these people that have been here for 20 years, and that's fine. I'm somebody that believes in the family, nuclear family. You take a dad that's been in this country for 20 years and he's not a citizen, the rest of them are, and then put him on a bus to some Mexican city, and you're okay with that? I mean, that's just not right. So we need to, if they haven't committed crimes, if they've been here for a while, X amount of time, what have you, and then you make it a window where they can avail themselves of some type of status, permanent status. I think that's the right thing to do. And the reality is you're not going to get anything as far as border security and increased funding for all that unless you're at the table compromising. People just don't understand it, though, Drew. It is absolutely ridiculous how thick-headed some people can be.
Yeah. There's we really need to come together and compromise on a lot, especially with regards to immigration, because it's a complicated issue, and
we talked about it. That's what I was saying. If you want to find racism in America, it's directed towards Latinos more than any other group, more so than the blacks, I think. And that doesn't mean that the blacks aren't subject to some racism. They are, but I see more evidence, certainly as far as law enforcement, with Latinos.
Interesting. Very good. Not very good, but interesting perspective that I haven't heard elsewhere. So, let's talk a little bit about the military and really the deployment. That I guess most recently there was some talk about deploying it against looting and all of that. I know. Well, what's your position on the use of the National Guard, and then any other?
I think that the military is not trained to do law enforcement. They really aren't. They're trained to kill. That doesn't work too well in law enforcement. So, we have all the de-escalation techniques and strategies, and the training has been phenomenal in law enforcement. That's the buzzword now. We need more training. These people have been trained. The ones that are doing bad things are not doing them because they haven't been trained. So that wouldn't be I don't know what they do. Typically in situations, you got to realize I was just sheriff in the only training base and the largest base in for the Navy up in Great Lakes. And so, when we had a joint situation, they always just sat around and listened to us and took their cues from us. They're not like coming in here like with the old days with Patton with the big helmet and the sash and we're going to take that mountain. It's just not the way it happens. So I saw this these posts, people all excited. The 82nd Airborne was going to come in and kick some ass, and the Marines and what. It's not. It's Fantasyland or a Denzel Washington movie, but it's not the way it happens.
Mm-hmm. So, what are your thoughts on where the military should be deployed then? When we look at peacekeeping,
I think we have to
right terrorism,
I'm totally against all those historical backdrops, and I would say I'm not a neocon on any level. So there was no reason for us to be in the Middle East for the most part. And beyond that, I mean, we have interests around the globe, and we probably should have some presence in different places just to keep an eye. And in the case that we're needed, there's a place where we can go to. But for the most part, nation building doesn't work. I could speak for the next 10 days as to why that is. I think that we should evaluate the size of the military. What do we need a standing military of about 1.3 million right now, or could we do with a lot less? Could we have more in the National Guard? So all those things should be evaluated. Every country we're in should be reevaluated as to whether or not we really need to be there. Is it in America's best interest? And I mean, I feel horrible about people in Afghanistan and Syria, but I don't see there being any great benefit for American troops to go over there and fight those battles. I mean, there's a problem with the way those governments are set up, and they're not ripe to democracy. That you're not going to be able to set up a democracy there. It's just not the way it works. I mean, I understand the Quran better than probably most of your listeners out there, and as long as they're going to have a religious state, it's not going to work for any type of democracy. So we're just letting young American boys get killed over there for no reason.
Yeah. What about, I mean, obviously from a terrorism perspective, we need to, have a, well, not necessarily an overseas presence, but really gets, I guess, into kind of the whole cyber world and information is really that. You think that's where resources should be more deployed?
Recruiting terrorists from the dark web.
Well, yeah, just keeping. I mean, in terms of putting resources into, into information.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what's true? If we're not over there, they'll be coming over here. I think that the more persuasive argument is that our being over there has them so upset that it's riling them up to come over here. And you look at that, George Bush declared victory standing on that ship, remember, years ago. And the reality was that Iraq is in a worse place now than it was then, that they burned our flag, that they can't wait for us to leave, that they hate the fact that we're there. And this is the majorities. I don't know what we were doing. So I think that the border is key. I think that resources spent on the FBI and spent on immigration and customs and spent on border patrol and spent on all the different federal partners, ATF, what have you, is money well spent, because that's where we're going to protect our safety best, is on the homeland. Geographically, we're so far away from these nations that they don't pose much of a threat to us from where they stand. It's from within the walls of America.
Right. When talking about how we deploy resources, then one thing we haven't touched on yet is infrastructure, and gets back into COVID-19 and how do we come out of this downturn that we find ourselves in. What are your thoughts in terms of infrastructure spending, and also the overall rate of spending that we're at.
Yeah, I think the rate of spending is alarming. It's bad. I mean, for me, everything that drives my perspective is my children, and I just don't think it's right that we're going to spend all this money now and we're going to leave them the bill. It's just it's my generation. I mean, I have a lower standard of living than my dad did, but my standard of living's fine. But you don't want to keep doing that to every future generation, and it's just not right. So, and it's not right to have China owning America. I mean, this is not speaking out of turn. This is not something that's a big hidden secret. They aspire to be the world's number one superpower, and they aspire to do it economically. They aspire to destroy us economically. So, the China coming over here and buying up property all over the place and everything else, I mean, it's, that's bad. So we need to rein in the spending big.
Okay. How do we do that and still invest in our infrastructure, or do you think that should really be limited?
Yeah. So I'm not somebody that's going to tell you that that Social Security and Medicare are going to be, you're going to see big cuts. It's just not. This country doesn't have a stomach for that. It won't have a stomach for that. And so I'm not going to be the guy that tries to scare elderly people and say that has to be addressed, because it's just not a reality. I mean, that's fantasy land. So that takes away a big percentage of the federal budget right there. I think that we're going to have to tax more, and that's just an absolute reality. Number one. Number two, I think that the other things like the military, the size of the military budget, that has to be considered. I think that there's things that we could be doing with Medicaid. I'm not saying that it's necessarily going to get that much cheaper though, but the combination of Medicaid and the overruns with Obamacare and everything else, that's been a big drag on the American budget as well. So we have to be very critical, and we have to be honest about what can we cut and what can't. So, I mean, there's entitlements that people can say all they want, but you can tune them a little bit. I mean, I don't think it would be completely destructive to a slight increase, in ages, but I wouldn't want
some means testing probably.
Means testing much better, exactly.
Yeah.
Much better, and that would be something that you're exactly. Why does a billionaire need a Social Security check?
Right.
Yeah, exactly right.
All right. Well, I think we covered a great range of topics. I really appreciate your time.
Yes, absolutely.
My
pleasure.
For people who want to find out more, where is the best place for them to look?
So they can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. It's former Sheriff Mark Curran, candidate for United States Senate. It's Elect Curran is the website. We're all over the place. We have a presence everywhere. We have a presence on Instagram and all the other modes that you would think of.
All right, and you're putting some that website we were talking about earlier.
YouTube, we have
you're going to be you have some more information that's going to be
right, exactly. So yeah, we just did a complete overhaul of the website, so it's going to be looking really good.
Yeah, great. All right, well,
thank you, Drew. It's on to victory.
All right, well, best of luck.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah, take care. Cheers.